Evening, everyone. So this evening is a very special evening. Apart from everything else, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome a super senior of mine from IIM Ahmedabad, and it's the last time I saw him, he was in campus and he was out there to hire us, and we are trying to impress. Uh, I can tell you, not much has changed. So I was trying to do the same thing even now. I was trying to figure out what's the smart thing that I can say. Um, Obviously, I couldn't find any. So, sir, could I request all our panelists to take the stage, and I'll start introducing them while on the stage. Starting with Dr. Vijay Kelkar, sir, Jerry, sir, Dr. Abhay Firodia, Professor Pradeep Apte, and Mr. Suren Kirwadkar. I'm going to keep it very brief in terms of introducing these people. These are the people who don't need any introduction. So, all of us, including me, we have gathered here to listen to them. So, probably I'm just going to do a very, very short introduction and hand over the program to session chair, Dr. Vijay Kelkar. Starting with our author of the evening. Sir, can I keep on calling you Jerry instead of Jaithirth? So, Jerry, sir, we all know he's the founder of Emphasis. Before that, he was instrumental. This is something which I know from background. He was instrumental in setting up the Citibank on the technology innovation side of things. Right now, he writes columns in several publications, Indian Express, Swaraj. He taught at IIM Ahmedabad, IIT Bombay, and so I don't know, for some reason we don't have the most innovative startup that you did after you did Emphasis. That was in value housing, so low cost housing at a scale. So that's something which is a brilliant thing that all of us should look up and know more about. Dr. Vijay Kelkar, I'm not even going to begin. Padma Vibhushan, chairman of Finance Commission, several secretarial posts, several government committees. So, as my favorite saying about Dr. Kelkar is, before I met him, he was a GK question. What was the Kelkar committee report about? So I'm so glad that I got a chance and opportunity to work with him. Professor Pradeep Apte, many people say he is a professor of economics, but this is the second time, sir, I'm boring you with the same introduction, and I think I'm going to keep repeating it. He should be named University of Professor Apte. He's no longer professor of economics. I think there is a legion of people of various generation who vouch by his classes, and he continues to be as popular. Sir, pleasure to have you here again. Mr. Suren Kirwadkar, now, sir, I'm going to read it out from what I've been given. He's a staunch Punekar and is proud of Indore origin. And the discussion that we were having just now was that how Marathi was prevalent in several clusters. So it's not just the Pune thing, and how there are several bodies which are promoting Marathi, or at least there were Marathi clusters out there. Born and brought up in MP, he got his master's degree from Holkar College. He went on to Northwestern University, Chicago, and he started his corporate career in Hindustan Unilever and had senior management position in Colgate Palmolive, Britannia, and Citibank. And he likes to read music and likes to do painting. Finally, and last but not the least, Dr. Abhay Firodia, chairman of Force Motors, Force Behind Force Motors, and member of Pune International Center. He is the president of Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. He has been president of Mahatma Chamber of Commerce and Industries, and he was president of Society of Indian Automobiles and Manufacturer. There are many other things to do, but the most important credential, he is also an esteemed member of Pune International Center. With that, I hand it over to you, Dr. Kelkar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to make 2 points, 2 minutes introduction to add to what you said. I think Jaithirth Rao is probably India's leading public intellectual. He has been educating us for now several years, and well, if you want to, you haven't brought your articles together in a book form, have you?
You were there in the Delhi thing.
Yes.
When you released that.
That's right.
That was
Then after,
7
yeah, but after that, okay. I think you should reissue it. They were the most educative series of articles he wrote. Very, very provocative, always, but always very thoughtful. So I would just add that it's really a privilege to have us, Jerry, with us today. This is one a very important book we will discuss. Today the game plan is following. I would request Mr. Rao to make brief remarks, whatever you want to say about the book. Then I'll invite each of the panelists to make their observations. Then we'll have discussion, and I will make final remarks. So, without much ado, let me invite uh, Jaithirth Rao. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelkar. It's a privilege and an honor for me to be here and for you to agree to preside over the evening's happenings. I thought I'd briefly let you know how the book came about to be written. For some years now, or several years ago, I was part of the founding group of a new liberal arts college outside Delhi called Ashoka University. And about a year and a half ago, I was talking to Rudrangshu Mukherjee, the chancellor there, and I was mourning the fact that the entire faculty and the entire ethos of Ashoka has become extremely left wing, Marxist, postmodern, Freudian, without an alternate conservative point of view being presented to the students. Being the gracious Bhadralok he is, he promptly invited me. He said, "Why don't you come and give them a series of lectures?" Which is what I did. And subsequently, he introduced me to this young lady, Chiki Sarkar, who's the publisher of Juggernaut, and we converted that series of lectures into a book. So that's the origin of the book. The idea is to present to young people in India, and doesn't have to be only young people, but people in India, an alternate point of view, where post Indira Gandhi and Noor al Hassan, the entire academic world, not so much in economics and business, but in all the other social sciences and humanities, have been colonized by postmodernists, Marxists, and Freudians. And this is true not only of India, it's also true largely of North America and Europe. In fact, the Indian studies departments of most American and British universities are again largely Marxist, Freudian, or postmodern in their view. So I divided the book into 5 sections: economic, political, social, cultural, and one section on aesthetics and education. The principal thesis of the book is it is true modern conservatism on the political side, particularly as we know it, dates from Edmund Burke and has a large Anglo-Saxon component to it. Burke, his contemporaries in Scotland, David Hume and Adam Smith, and across the Atlantic, of course, Hamilton and Jay and Madison, and to some extent Jefferson, represent. It's not a continental doctrine. By and large, political conservatism, as we know it today, is an Anglo-Saxon product. But I have argued that while that is true for modern conservatism, that conservatism, in fact, in India has very deep and long, old, antique roots. And I have gone back to 2 what I refer to as foundational texts of our country, of our culture, of our civilization. The Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata and the Tirukkural or Tiruvallur. The general argument that Orientalists have made is Indian thinkers are interested in moksha, liberation. They run off to Himalayan caves and meditate. They are otherworldly. Now, both the Shanti Parva and the Tirukkural are extremely this worldly. They are very much about individuals, human beings in society, in this world. They are very much about the pursuit of wealth and political affairs, which is referred to as Artha in the Shanti Parva and as Porul in the Tirukkural. The pursuit of the pleasure principle, passion, which is referred to as Kama in the Shanti Parva and as Inmam in the Tirukkural. The pursuit above all, and this is very important, this is central to Indian consciousness, is the pursuit of dharma, which is righteousness, virtue in the Shanti Parva, which is called Aram in the Tirukkural. And The mischievous kind of implication around this is that if you pursue these three, the fourth one, moksha or salvation, is automatically taken care of. Do this well is kind of implied. There's a kind of sleight of hand out there. I've also then kind of made a quick jump. I've also referred to a few other ancient texts, the Apastamba Sutra of the Yajurveda, where the original idea of Yoga Dharma, that Dharma changes with different ages and epochs, is first enunciated. Kane, who was a resident of this great town, in fact, has done the original translation of that. The modern times, of course, when we talk about conservatism, on the political side, it's really Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Bankim. These are the fathers of the two schools of modern Indian conservatism. Burkean conservatism, you can say, is Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and Bankim is the father of what we call today Hindu nationalism. And these are both, in my opinion, legitimate academic disciplines worth studying. They are legitimate schools of thought. They are either siblings or they have overlaps. And I've done a kind of view down from Ram Mohan Roy all the way down to Rajagopalachari and Masani, and from Bankim all the way through Lajpat Rai down to Deen Dayal. The issue here really is people always say, but Hindu nationalism, it's not. And I disagree. I think it is a very legitimate field of Indian conservatism. It can have some excesses, but you don't judge anything by the excesses, you judge it by its mainstream. The other big point that I make in the political section is that pre-independence conservatives in India have received a bad name, particularly post-1947, because many of them were either supporters or partial supporters or admirers of the British Raj. They have all been classified as traitors and, of course, as compradors by the communists. The fact that the communists in 1941, under Stalin's instructions, supported the British, that is conveniently forgotten because they do everything under Stalin's instructions all the time anyway. My point is Rajaram Mohan Roy specifically said he wanted British rule to continue in India for a long time so that we could learn from them. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee ends the Anand Math actually almost arguing that British rule is providential for India, particularly for Hindus, insofar as it will lead to a renaissance among them. This is not. And right through, if you look, Ambedkar was a member of the Viceroy's Executive Council right through the war. Does that mean he's a traitor? Rajagopalachari opposed the Quit India movement. Does that mean he's a traitor? So on the political sides, I've said that by delegitimizing those people who were moderates and who had a kind of a balanced, if you will, view of the British Raj, we have done ourselves a disfavor. Jadunath Sarkar is not taught, Radha Kumud Mukherjee is not taught, Nilakant Shastri is not taught. So all the historians of that time period have just been bundled away, and we get totally Marxist views of Indian history. The real section that I would urge all of you, if you do buy the book, which you should because I do need royalties, is the cultural section. In culture is where I think we have had a real problem because of the Orientalist 19th century view that there was no India, therefore there's no such thing as Indian culture. And of course the present Marxist view that everything is about subaltern groups and anyone who talks about an overarching Indian culture is an upper caste Brahminical hegemon and male also, not just Brahminical, but male hegemon, and therefore should be dismissed. I disagree strongly, and I believe that our cultural persona goes back, and Dr. Kelkar and I was talking upstairs before coming here, at least at a minimum 1300 years to Adi Shankara when he set up the 4 monasteries in the 4 corners of the country. One small tidbit in the book that you might want to pay attention to, Ramanujacharya, when he needed an unexpurgated good copy of the Brahma Sutras, because there were always interpolations, people would put, in those days were all manuscripts, no printing. From Kanchipuram, he went all the way to Sharda in Kashmir, which is now a ruined village on the other side of the LOC, to get the authentic Brahma Sutras manuscript. So this geographic sacred land is really, sacred geography is really there, and it's not just Hindu. There's a Sufi pilgrimage circuit, Ajmer, Gulbarga, Nagaur, etc. within India. There's a Jain pilgrimage circuit. So it's not only about being exclusively Hindu, it's a definition of India as a sacred geography. And I reject this idea that therefore we are merely a civic nation with a constitution and lines on a map. We are a cultural entity, and if the English can think of themselves as a cultural entity from Shakespeare down to Beatles and Harry Potter, and if the Israelis can think of their land as being the promised land, I don't see why we cannot. So the cultural section, I've spent a lot of time, and I think it's a very important one. On the social stuff, I've been reasonably optimistic. I believe that the conservative view that Disraeli and Burke separately enunciated was that we need to change in order to preserve the best of the past. It's not true that conservatives oppose all change. So on issues like caste and gender and so on and so forth, I am actually quite optimistic at the way India has practiced gradual evolutionary constitutional change. Of course, I'm completely opposed to violent, revolutionary, abrupt change. And I'm quite, really quite sanguine about the way we've evolved, and I think that will continue. On the aesthetic side, I really think we are doing quite well. And generally, my book is criticism of state intervention, but I have praised one important state intervention, which is All India Radio, which kind of led to the rebirth of Hindustani and Carnatic classical music in the post-1947 era. And I think we are doing very well. We've invented our own new music form called playback singing, where somebody sings and somebody else lip syncs and runs around a tree. This is unique to India, unique to the Indian cinema industry, and it has become a very vigorous art form. So we are, unlike, say, England today, Roger Scruton, the greatest living conservative English philosopher, is always mourning the fact that English church music is dying. Nobody goes to churches. Nobody knows how to play the organ anymore. But that's not the case here. We have a very vigorous art scene. We failed in architecture. I mean, Chandigarh is a monstrous city. Gandhinagar is disappointing. Navi Mumbai is terrible. Naya Raipur is a ghost town. Bhubaneswar is not so bad among all the new cities. But in general, even Indian private sector architecture, of course, government architecture, PWD architecture is terrible. But private sector also, this imitation Singapore steel glass that you find in Bangalore and increasingly in Pune is extremely disappointing. So there are areas where we as conservatives, I think, need to be concerned about. I end with making reference to the fact that conservatism and conservation have the same root. And I think, therefore, we have a great role to play in the conservation movement. Burke talks about it. He says that we have a contract with our ancestors and with our descendants. Unlike all these revolutionary guys who are only interested in the immediate, conservatives have this ongoing issue of ancestors and descendants. And in one of his most brilliant speeches that he made in the House of Commons on the Prince of Arcot's debts, but by the way, they are some of Burke's best interventions, not his Warren Hastings impeachment. I'd urge you, it's all available in public domain in Google, you can read it. He talks about the fact that the kings of India built reservoirs and canals, not for their benefit, but for the benefit of succeeding generations. So I believe this thought of holding, which is also Mahatma Gandhi's thought, of holding the land in trust for future generations is something where conservatives should participate in the debate and the discussion, and hopefully in coming to a more harmonious resolution than currently the country seems to be capable of doing. I'm going to stop there. That gives you a kind of bird's eye view of what the book is all about. We can open up for comments and further questions. Thank you.
See, I told you something about wanting to impress Jerry. That's an example of it. This is also a reminder that this book is out there on sale. So please make sure you get your copy and Jerry's sign on it as well.
And I would urge everyone to buy it. Really, absolutely brilliant book. I would encourage people to buy it. Now, before, I think all of us will have a 10 minutes each or 12 minutes, and then we'll have. Joseph.
Let me begin by saying that this is indeed one of the most satisfying books I have read in the last many years. Jerry, you have done great service. It's comprehensive. It's conservative, it's balanced. It's well reasoned. It is amazingly referenced. The last chapter in your book on references is a syllabus for anybody who wants to understand what humanity, society, what progress is all about. Having said that, what appealed to me the most, of course, his coverage is comprehensive on politics and economics and culture and so on. But what appealed to me the most was the very sharp definition of the economic inflection that happened, or the inflection in the economic thinking of India happened in the Nehruvian period. Till independence, the influence of the really solid conservatives in India like Sri Rajgopalachari, Mahatma Gandhi, before that, the previous generation of Gokhale and Tilak, and so many others, was very tall, very big. It's an accident of history that the Englishman Nehru became our Prime Minister, because he was supposed to be an interim Prime Minister during the transition period. Gandhi had never accepted partition. But Nehru was lucky insofar as Patel died within a year and a half. Gandhi died within a few months, or was killed within a few months. He brushed aside Rajgopalachari, Kripalani, and Rajendra Prasad, and took over the Congress party and turned it left. I remember as a student having read his book on glimpses of world history, etc. I had forgotten what it was like or what he had said till my son was in school and my father ordered a copy for him to read. He didn't read, but I read it again. And it said in a letter to his daughter, Dear Indu, if ever India becomes independent, he was writing 1927 from Naini jail, we must follow the Soviet model. We cannot trust the capitalists. These are his words. So this was the greatest disaster to have happened to India, where the economic fate of this country was handed over to the leftists through Nehru. Men of no consequence like Mahalanobis and Krishna Menon and so many others came to positions of amazing power, and they turned India left. We had the misfortune 1,000 years ago of the Muslim marauders coming to India and destroying our conservative values. It took several hundred years for India to subdue them, and then came the exploiting colonialists, and it took a few hundred years to assimilate their good part and jettison their bad part. And then came the socialists and the communists. And they have been dominant in India for 70 years in the political and economic sphere, now gradually we see a new sunrise. So, this aspect, which has affected our country enormously, having gone from 30% of the share of the world trade to 1.5%, has been a tragedy of the highest order in the annals of human history. But the reversal of this we see before our eyes is happening. It's happening very slowly. This is my greatest regret today, that the Modi government, for all its conservatism, for all its focus on the poor, does not have an understanding of the economic imperatives of developing our country back into a position of strength. They are good at what they are doing in terms of the reform socially and politically. Economic focus is missing. And I am very, very happy that this aspect, that the Marxists have had such an asymmetric influence on India, has been beautifully captured in this book. So far as the cultural sphere is concerned, I would like to speak about education in a few lines. The education that we got even during the British Raj was a far more balanced education than what we get today. I recall my history book in school. It was written by F.C. Pierce, and it did cover quite a lot of history as we today want to understand it and see it. But for several generations, at least 2 or maybe 3 generations, the history that has been taught to us has been a synthetic, invented history, maliciously written to break our affinity to our land, to our culture, to destroy our confidence, and to make us hate ourselves for some unknown kind of attraction that the Marxists have. So this aspect has been very sensitively been dealt with. Jerry is a very polite man, so he uses phrases and words which are very elegant. But in Pune we say shal zoditla, which means that you hide a shoe in your shawl and put it there. So he has done that amply, and I am very, very satisfied to see at last a single tome which encompasses the complete spectrum of the conservative thought of India, how valid it is, how ancient it is. It is not something invented in Bangalore post the IT revolution. It is something which has come down to us through thousands of generations. He speaks of, and I was delighted that he speaks of Tirukural. Tiruvalluvar was, according to the Shankaracharya of Kanchi, and he said it to me, that Tiruvalluvar was a Jain monk. And these values, which are embedded in the Shraman tradition in India, are extraordinarily ancient. The Shraman tradition, starting with Rishabhadev of the Jains, is more ancient than the Vedas. The Rig Veda, the first Veda written on the banks of the Saraswati river, mentions Rishabhadev. These values evolved over 2 millennia till the time of Mahavir. And these are the values which Jerry refers to the Shanti Parva. But I prefer to focus more on the second chapter of the Gita, where Krishna is explaining to Arjun what a Sthita Prajna is. That is the core of our philosophy. The Shanti Parva is more about how you should live. But the second chapter is about what are you? And that is conservative, if anything. And this aspect of relating ancient figures like Tiruvalluvar and modern figures like Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, and of course, a whole plethora of very magnificent persona uh, over thousands of years, into the fabric of Indian conservatism, not only to mention them by name, but to point out what they stood for, what they said, how relevant it is, not just for its own time, which of course it was relevant, but for today. You don't have to follow it in the letter, but if you discover the spirit of it, then you are liberating yourself in a manner from the shackles of the Marxists and all the other despicable varieties that Jerry has covered so nicely in this. But I think this book will do great good, because if it reaches, and we must make sure it reaches, a whole lot of university students, in order to present a counterpoint which is non-violent, to present a counterpoint which is well reasoned, to present a counterpoint which is beautifully referenced, with impeccable personalities from history speaking up for the conservative values. That is a wonderful thing if it can be achieved, because it will write the course of our country's future. We have veered far too much to the left, and we have jettisoned the values of our culture. And I, for one, have no hesitation or no, what would you say, feeling of guilt to say that we have a culture. Of course, we have a culture. How can you not see not only the four mathas that he talked about, but look at the feeling of Indianness and the adherence or acceptance of our scriptures. The Mahabharata is there from the Himalaya down to Kanyakumari, and from Kutch all the way to Jalpaiguri. So you have this, but we have been told not to look at it. And it's wonderful that this book, in a very readable manner, in not obtuse language, brings out these, to me, the most important two aspects on economics and on education and values. Uh, when I was reading this book, I decided to underline a few things. In the end, I found that I was underlining whole half pages. So I have this underlined copy, and I'm glad that they have given me today, and I hope it is given to me a fresh copy which I can give to my son. Thank you very much.
Surrounded by intellectual heavyweights that I am, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. And I'm going to start on a lighter note. It has been said, and this quotation is attributed to many, many people, that if you are not a socialist when you are young, you don't have a heart. And if you are not a conservative when you have grown up, you don't have brains. Now, I won't like to embarrass Jerry by asking him when he became conservative, but what I would definitely like to say is that having known Jerry for the last 32 years, he has been a major influence on me. Jerry, very few people perhaps in the audience know, is the father of consumer banking in India. There was no consumer banking. The tailors used to sit behind bars. You had to stand in the queue, take a token, because the service itself was a token service. There are very few, very
high-level executives that I know who have given back to the society the intellectual capital that they acquired in their lives. There are two, three names which come to my mind. One is Mr. Prakash Tandon, who, just as Jerry recruited me for Citibank, Mr. Tandon recruited me for Hindustan Lever. And those of you who have read his books would realize that this man, he captured the history of Punjab, and through history of Punjab, history of India, through his personal experiences. The other name which comes to my mind is Gurcharan Das, a very good friend of Jerry, and you will find reference to him in the book. And of course, Jerry. The other thing that I want to mention is that it is not easy to talk about, as Mr. Firodia has said, to cover such a large landscape in the 5 areas that Jerry has talked about in 200 odd pages, and that too in an extremely elegant and readable style. And on top of that, Jerry is aware of the fact that this is just an hors d'oeuvre. He is giving you tidbits in these 5 areas, and he has given you a suggested reading list which can definitely enrich our knowledge, our understanding of our great past culture and civilization. One thing I was telling Jerry as we were having a tea was that I would request him in the next edition, Sudharun Varablelia Avritti Madhe, he should try and capture the phenomenal growth of populism which has taken place in the last 20 years. The full ideologies of capitalism, socialism, communism, they have disappeared. They may remain, but they are a formal shadow of themselves. There is no pure capitalism in the world. There is no pure communism in the world. And what has happened is that populism has become such a widespread thought that 20 years ago, there were only 2 countries in the world, Argentina and Venezuela, which were considered to be rightist led. Today, there are between 50 and 60 countries of the world with a population of 2 billion people who are led by populist leaders, including, of course, India. So, given Jerry's extraordinary understanding of the thinking that has gone on in different parts of the world, because he has also had the good fortune of not only studying but also working in different geographies of the country and having been in touch with different types of people at their highest level of abilities and proven abilities, I think that this gap that currently exists can only be filled by him. In the end, I would like to confess that I am a marketing man, and that's why Jerry took me in Citibank. And therefore, I would very much like you to buy not only a copy of this book, but also buy another copy so that you can share with someone, because I do not think you can make a better bargain than that. And with that, I conclude my few words.
Now, let me request Professor Apte.
Being a lecturer all these years, I can't sit and speak. Don't worry, I won't take 45 minutes. First of all, let me congratulate Jerry Rao for such a beautiful book, very engaging book. I have some reservations about not what he has written, but the amount that he has written. But I'll talk about that later. First of all, let us be clear, there is a problem with the term conservative. And we are people, we are humans who are prone to think in binary terms. What is an opposite to of conservative? It's very difficult really to define. But forget about searching for an opposite. Survey as a Latin verb has two meanings: either become a slave or be helpful or to save someone. And this is a book which is that means to be in helping something, saving something. And I think this will save number of aspects of academic and intellectual, as well as all those spheres that he has talked about. So in that sense, I agree with the term conservative. But the rightist and the leftist is, in fact, a more or less banal date kind of a dichotomy. It need not be really adhered to. Again, going by the etymology, dexterous is considered to be auspicious, and left, that is sinister, is supposed to be evil. And the whole Indian ethos and culture is to praise ambidextrous. And it is this ambidextrosity of the culture, of the social milieu, that matters, particularly for those people who understand social process of evolution, which is riddled with number of problems, number of transitional tensions. And it is this aspect which is in fact often ignored, and partly due to overwhelming ideological position or the habit of labeling. For example, because we are in Pune, I will give you some examples from Pune. Tilak is considered to be rightist, extremely orthodox, unwilling to change, and doesn't understand what the other camp is saying. And they are people who are to be praised. And who are those people? For example, Ranade, Bhandarkar, Agarkar, of course, Gopal Krishna Gokhale. For whatever unfortunate, all these people died before Tilak. And Tilak had an occasion to write obituary and read Tilak's obituaries. And you will understand, he is the one who understands what they meant and did best. You read what he wrote about Ranade, he passed away in 1901. And then you will understand how Ranade was a valuable person for Tilak. Another incident, both Dr. Firodia and myself, we are associated with that institution in the name of Bhandarkar. When Dr. Ketkar, Shri V. Ketkar, wanted to write an encyclopedia, and he approached Tilak. Tilak advised him, don't shoulder the responsibility on writing anything and everything on your own. You can probably write it, but it is better that you convince people, take them with you, ask them to write in the areas where they have an expertise, and you edit them. And in the matters of whatever now we call Oriental studies, Indology, ancient civilization in Occident, ask Dr. Bhandarkar to write about it. But please be sure, even if you are editor, don't change a word that he writes. This is what he says about the Bhandarkar, on whom he always had a kind of a confrontation on various issues. Third example, probably some people know this, but it is not too well known in Pune, that's why I am narrating. The Phule Mandi, as we call it, was earlier called Ordre Market. And then the proposal came in the Pune, it was not a municipal corporation, municipality at that time, to rename it in the memory of a person who shaped Pune or for whom the Pune would be known. And there was a tussle, and the vote was taken. The two names in the tussle were Lokmanya Tilak and Mahatma Phule. This is there in the history. This is there in the records. People who opposed Tilak were mostly Brahmins. People who opposed Phule were in fact his relatives. And it so happened that the votes were equal. And the president of that, who was presiding over that meeting, was supposed to be Tilak's right hand. And he casted his own special vote as a president in favor of Phule, and that is Nachim Kelkar. And that's how Phule Mandi is called Phule Mandi. It is not called Tilak Mandi. Instead, only Tilak's statue was erected just near the Phule Mandi, which stands even today. This is the kind of spirit which also exists in apparently warring tribes, so to say, and which people don't understand. For example, it is not enough highlighted. There are enough accounts of partition, but I don't think partition is a subject where a real comprehensive history is yet written in India. Partly because many of those papers are still supposed to be top secret in the memorial library. In fact, recently, Madhavrao Godbole wrote a very wonderful book on partition, but he could not deal with some of the aspects, presumably because many of these papers are yet to be available. But something which is well known, but not really understood. In 1939, Rajgopalachari was expelled from Congress for suggesting and supporting the idea of partition. The nature of partition proposal that he made was something which was the basis for removing him. In fact, not only was he required to resign from what was called prime ministerial post of the Madras province, but he was also expelled from Congress. And the people who proposed his expulsion were Vallabhbhai Patel and Pandit Nehru. This, of course, did not separate Rajgopalachari from Gandhi because, in fact, they had a family attire. But there is something more to it. In 1944, for nearly 2 consecutive weeks, Mahatma Gandhi discussed the proposal of the partition with Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah. There is an account of this, detailed account of this available in Gandhi's paper. Gandhi's assistant, Mahareva Desai, he used to narrate whatever that happened in the meeting to Rajaji. Later, because often we don't know that the partition proposals were also given by many stalwart leaders. For example, Lala Lajpat Rai. So was Rajgopalachari. So was Dr. Ambedkar. What was ultimately thrust upon us as a proposal to be implemented at certain date, which also created many problems, a very huge tragedy. But this attitude to partition, which is portrayed only for what Gandhi said, what Nehru said, but please understand what were the proposals and what other people were saying. Have you ever read in your textbook what Ambedkar wrote about partition? Have you ever read about what Rajgopalachari had to say about partition? Or for that matter, Lala Lajpat Rai, much earlier in 1928-29, he said, if it is to be done, how it is to be done. He even calculated the values of property, etc., if they were to be in fact compensated for. There are several such aspects of history which remain unexposed, unexplored, not even talked about, precisely because of the kind of bias that we have either institutionally or ideologically cultivated in the entire writing. You referred to some of the historians, like for example, you have referred to Jadunath Sarkar. In fact, again referring to Pune. Indian History Congress was launched by Bharati Ityas Sanshodhak Mandal. And after its institution, Many of the founding institutions has withered away. They are not even formally invited to participate ICH. Who are the founders? Rajwade. And also his small disciple at that time, but later big historian, G.H. Khare. The kind of work they did to cultivate history of what is called as a Maratha kingdom, because we often don't realize that the British did not seize power from Mughals, but from the Marathas. And there are so many facets of in between 100 years of Maratha history which were not known. In fact, precisely for this purpose, Ranade first wrote a book on the Maratha history. So I think there has been some kind of undue ideological predilection. Softer words have deliberately, which have probably overshadowed and therefore made the whole distortion about our own past. And distortions come not only from left side, they also come from the so-called rightist side. I have enough friends both in CPM as well as in RSS. And on many issues, I tell them, why do you waste paper? Effectively, you are saying the same thing to only change the printer and the publisher name. This is true, for example, for GATT. When the GATT proposals came, when Dunkel draft proposal came, it was precisely the same thing. Many of the people on the so-called rightist camp believe that whatever is ours was great and good. It should be other way around. Whatever that is great and good should be ours. You take this approach, you will get a different picture. Then there is no need to necessarily slander British, blame British for anything and everything, which unfortunately even Shashi Tharoor does. There are so many facets of British influence on Indian society which has made us what we are today. In fact, for that matter, the whole archaeology that we have was because of one single-handed work of Cunningham. Had Cunningham been not interested on his own personal interest, then probably this discipline would not have come. Archaeology of the AIs that has been formed because of his work and Cunningham. One person single-handedly writes 21 volumes. In fact, one of my friend and we have a plan to write something, their version of Bharatvarsha, त्यांची Bharat Vidya. Because there are many aspects of Bharat Vidya which were in fact revived and restored because of the British Raj. British Raj was one thing and the Britishers were quite another thing. And if we lose this sight, I think we get this kind of a very lopsided view of the history. It's a good thing that you have written about many such things in one single book. You referred to something that has happened to Ashok University, and I thought so, and in fact, in one of your YouTube interviews, I also heard that also today. But unfortunately, you are not dealt with this with a great length. Namely, the most damaging influence that we face today in academic circles. Probably this is too much of an exaggeration. By academic circle, you effectively most of the time mean two, at best three departments, namely English literature, sociology, and sometimes political science. It is these three departments where the so-called left, liberal, postmodernist approaches dominate the language, which is mostly empty. And calling it empty is something which has become almost near to blasphemy. If you are not conversant with this, if you ever attend any such kind of a seminar, usually in these three departments, you will never be able to make head or tail of what is being said. Never ever. In fact, myself and some of my friends, those who understand Marathi, they can easily recognize what it is. Before the starting a meal, we call it Vadani Kavada Geta. It is in the same meter. We used to call it Mazakura Samajayena Namagya Deri Dace. Sahaj Vazana Yeta Namageta Fukote. This is what the situation is. In fact, this thing is not often known. Alan Sokal and Francis Wien have written about this even in popular manner. Yeah. And that spurious article, there's an interesting story that I'll tell you just briefly. What Alan Sokal, he's a physicist, French physicist, and he's a heavy critic of this whole, in fact, his book on these so-called postmodernist trends is called Fashionable Nonsense. And to prove that fashionable nonsense, he devised a very wonderful thing. He devised a computer program. He picked up phrases from the nature of literature which these people write and generated a computer program generated paper and submitted to the very same journal for which this is supposed to be their real Makkah, that is social register. And it got published. And there were reactions to it. And it was later, after 4 issues, Alan Sokal revealed that this is just plain nonsense. This is a computer generated article. It means nothing. But this kind of an influence, these kinds of ideas, for example, under root -1 is a sexist number. E equal to mc square is an anti-feminist equation. You can read such kind of a material in this beautiful world of postmodernists, Foucaultists, Derridites. And I think that needs to be countered because the entire social science discipline is likely to be subjected to this nonsense for a very long time. And you need not know anything. You need not have read Henry V. You need not know what King Lear is, but you can talk about historicity and unhistoricity of Shakespeare. In fact, many times Shakespeare is not taught, but people have an opinion about this. If we want to save our academic culture from this kind of absolutely nonsensical influences, it is high time that you write a book on this, and most notably by drawing examples from Indian academic writings of this genre. And I think this is one exclusion which I would complain about in your book. Second thing is that there are some minor exclusions. For example, you could have included Sharad Joshi, Ashok Desai, also recently Vivek Devroy, in the writings of the type where there have been the arguments for the nature of market reforms. There are, of course, Dr. K. I should have said the present honorable companies. But I really wonder when Professor Dr. Vijay Kalkar used to write as a BICB chairman, the kind of papers that he wrote, I wonder these would have been published in EPW now. You know, the Dharma Kumar, in fact, complained about this. The nature of writings that get published in EPW have so inherent intrinsic predilective bias that probably people who are in favor of or in love of dialectics are actually in love of predilection. This is something which one should be able to avoid. And I think one needs a heavy critique of this. The book is wonderful, very comprehensive, so much comprehensive that, as it typically happens with some authors, that they write a very beautiful short story. And when you read that story, you realize that actually it has a potential of 3 sequel novel. So I hope you write a novel, 3 sequel novel, because each of the chapters or the spheres that you are talking about is worthy of that. And I hope you write this. Thank you.
Friends, now floor is open for ask question, any one of them, including the author. But please ask question, no statements of your own, because we want more participants. Yes, Sumita, you start.
What was the reaction of the students when you gave these lectures? And do you have plans to give them in universities which are definitely on the very left side?
The attendance was reasonably sparse. So I don't know. But it is interesting that a bunch of about 3 or 4, maybe half a dozen, came back to see me that evening in my room in the college guest house, saying that they were so happy to come to my lecture because they are living in this leftist bubble, and that they were actually scared to even say that they had right-wing predilections in their class. They would get hounded. And I'm in touch with a few of these students in trying to see how we can take this forward. By the way, this is not a problem unique to Indian universities. My daughter went and did a master's in London School of Economics. There was an Israeli alumnus who was an engineer and a technology entrepreneur and an alumnus of London School. So he was coming back and giving a lecture on technology and entrepreneurship. He was banned. because it's such a pro-Palestinian faculty in London School of Economics, they wouldn't allow an Israeli to speak. So he had to go and speak at some other place outside LSE. And when my daughter went there, they were really worried, why is this girl coming here? And they kind of, but she's a big Zionist. So, but anyway, but she got through after being kind of, metal detector and all that. But this is a big problem in European and American universities. And the departments you mentioned are absolutely correct. English literature you can study without really reading T.S. Eliot, but reading some translations of Central American writers, as long as they're feminist and Native American, then they qualify. Things like that. History. You can get a degree in history in an American college without reading Gibbon or Toynbee, but only Foucault and Derrida. And Foucault, people like them are evil. Foucault actually wrote an article supporting the Khomeini revolution, because anything that is anti-America, anti-West, anti-capitalist, he will support. In fact, post 9/11, if you have noticed, a lot of American academia has become pro-Islamic, not because they like Islam, but anybody who's anti-American, they will support. It's a very dangerous kind of thing. Economics, business schools, yes, there is a little bit more rationality, but all other social sciences and humanities, they have captured. Yes, sir.
I guess conservatism is about conserving something. And one of the things I imagine conservatives would want to conserve would be the truth. If there is such a thing as the truth, and I suppose you believe in that because you denounce postmodernism and so on. Now, amongst the various statements that were made, purportedly in a conservative frame, there are these just three issues that I highlight. And since you're supposed to ask questions, I'm asking questions. Do we really believe that the Mughal India can only be called Muslim and that it actually destroyed our culture, whatever our culture meant? And whether our culture, with all its richness, its diversity, all right, whether it is food, whether it is music, whether it's art, whether it is, landscape designing and so on and so forth, gardens, formal gardens, would it be what it is today without that? And had they been really such fanatical Muslims, would 80% of us still be Hindus? One. Two, if we think that somebody called Nehru and some insignificant person, voting, called Mahalanobis, this is a very funny way of describing Mahalanobis, I think, or Krishna Menon for that matter, that they imposed, say, the public sector or whatever. I mean, do we remember something called the Bombay Plan, which the Indian bourgeoisie actually had conjured up, and not conjured up, had very carefully framed, okay, asking for the state, Indian state after independence to play an important role. Do we remember it? And three, Sokal. Okay. Do we remember that Sokal, while we like to remember that he criticized postmodernism, was he not a Marxist? This was 20 years ago. But I think, I was still sort of around at that time. And I do remember that he was a Marxist. You can check that out. And finally, I must say that the point about populism, I really appreciate. And one wonders, whether, there is a populism, of course there's a populism of the right, and there's a populism of the left. So it's not about conservatism or postmodernism or whatever. It's about populism, and that is a real danger today. Absolutely, I agree with that. And so let's not peddle populist conservatism to oppose some other kind of evil that we see, whether on the left or wherever.
Anyway, I'll leave Professor to deal with your last question on Sokal. The only thing that I found interesting, funny about his article was that it got accepted by this premier postmodern journal, and it is really nonsense. There's a brilliant book by Scruton called Fools, Firebrands, and Charlatans, when he talks about all these Derrida and Althusser and Foucault and the kind of damage they have done to scholarship. It is a continental phenomenon. Let me also be very clear. I think those of us who have a penchant for Anglo-Saxon kind of thinking and to um, avoid a controversial word, to Indic thinking, we find this continental intellectual discourse led by Foucault and Derrida fairly pathetic. There is no two ways about that. But I will let Professor deal with that question. Your other two questions, Bombay Plan, interesting. Bombay Plan, there are some recent nice books about Bombay Plan have come back. It talked about compulsory, free, primary, secondary, tertiary, and vocational education. That is what Mr. Tata, Mr. Birla were advocating. The government of India never, because they were influenced by the Soviets, they wanted engineering colleges, and they spent all the little money that we had on higher education. Primary education, even in a progressive state like Tamil Nadu, where I come from, till 1967, in government schools, you had to pay fees to study. So the poorest people in this country had to pay fees for their children to study in government schools till 1967. It's only the DMK party which changed it. Under the Congress government for 20 years. So I think, yes, they did ask for government intervention. I'm not denying. And maybe they shouldn't have. But there is a lot of damage that Nehru and Mahalanobis did and their acolytes. There is no two ways about it. We were had 2% of world trade. We went down to 0.4% before Narasimha Rao liberated us. Now we are back at about 1%. If we had just kept 2% market share, we would be now 4 times as rich as we are. And Korea and us had roughly the same per capita GDP in 1960. Now they are 13 times more, 1,300% more. I mean, you're not talking about small numbers. The lost opportunities and the incremental poverty in the economic sphere because of adopting the Stalinist policies, having a planning commission, driving Shenoy out of Delhi, putting in only their people into the economics faculty, we lost a lot. And they are responsible. Way back at Karachi Congress time, Nehru was already forming a planning commission. And he was already writing, he and Subhash Bose were writing manifestos saying, let us nationalize coal. Now, if you're a coal mine owner, and you know these guys are going to come to power in 10 years, and you get this manifesto saying, are you going to reinvest in that coal mine? I mean, look at the kinds of disastrous things that happen. There is in this book a lot of lament for the Swatantra Party, because the Swatantra Party stood up against this stupidity. And in fact, we would have had famine on the scale of Soviet Union and China, because after Avadi, K.D. Malavya, V.K. Krishna Menon, and Panditji seriously considered collective farming. If that had happened, just like China lost 25 million people and Stalinist Soviet Union lost 25 million people, we would have. It was a Swatantra and one person in the Congress, Charan Singh, who prevented collective farming. In history, when we do counterfactuals, we never give credit for people who made things not happen and who saved us. I think Charan Singh deserves a special applause for that. What was your... there was Bombay Plan, Sokal, and? Populism. Yeah, populism is interesting, Suren, that you brought it up, and I think I'm going to... Oh, Mughals. Okay, this is a very northern Indian view. In South India, we don't think of Mughals as important at all. They never came there. So, this was Mughal, Muslim, and so on. In fact, I have argued in my book that these are all idiotic ways of looking at it. Chakkani Rajamargamu in Karaharapriya is a Tyagaraja Kriti, which on Nadaswaram. Who plays it best? Sheikh Channamalana. In Thiruvilayadal, the song Pattum Nane, which Shiva sings in Madurai, I am the song, I am the music. It's written by Kamu Sharif. I mentioned Shakil Badayuni, Naushad, Dilip Kumar, Rafi, Madhuban Meradika. So I don't think this, this business, these binaries, we should accept. And certainly there are large areas. The binaries seem to come up only in politics. And frankly, I mentioned in the book, if Gandhi had come to India in 1900, he might have gone on a fast run to death against separate electorates for Muslims. In which case, this binary may never have arisen. These are the historic contingencies of history. Once you give them separate electorates, there is no incentive for a moderate Muslim leader to make friends with Hindus. He has greater incentive, which is why he went on a fast unto death against Ramsay MacDonald's decision to give separate electorates to the Dalits. Gandhi was very clever. He knew that that would be disastrous for creating this band of brothers feeling, which I have repeatedly referred to. The band of brothers and what Abraham Lincoln calls the mystic chords of memory, I think are very important for getting people together. Okay?
Yeah, here, at the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned about the lack of balance in academia, and you mentioned the example of Ashoka as well. Simple question, probably not a very easy answer, but how do we address this?
It's extremely difficult. 68 is really, to my mind, both in America and definitely in India, the beginning of this problem. After the Berkeley riots, after the Chicago Democratic Convention, American academia in the social sciences and humanities made a definite leftward turn. At the same time, Foucault and the continental intellectuals became popular. In fact, Derrida was first translated into English by an Indian, Gayatri Spivak. She gave the dubious gift of Derrida to world academia, otherwise it would have remained in French and we would have been better off. So in India, it was more conscious. I think Indira Gandhi was quite worried that these leftists will create trouble. Post Paris riots, she actually felt that, we could get into trouble in this country. So the best thing is to tame them, put them in university campuses, in various historical congress, these ICSSR, all these bodies, let them have tea and biscuits and let them go occasionally to Moscow and Leningrad on trips and kind of tame them. Essentially, paltu janwar bana do. That was her idea, and it was ruthlessly and cleverly implemented by Nurul Hasan, who was her guy. He was a Marxist himself, and he has made a speech in Calcutta. It's in public. It's not something he hid. He said, we will appoint Marxists. In the next 20 years, we will be dominating the universities and the intellectual fraternity. So for 20, 30 years now, you have all PhD students. They don't even give admission to a PhD student who wants to think differently. Certainly they don't give you a tenure track job or promotion. So you get marginalized, and there are no. So this BJP government's response of putting somebody who believes that Ram flew in a plane and all as professor is stupid. It's a self-goal. That doesn't solve the problem. We have to work very hard to figure out how to create scholarship. Even in America, scholarship on India is dominated by Freudians, on Indian religion. There's a guy who's written a book saying that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was a homosexual who used to abuse his disciples. And that's published. And it's very thinly researched, but it's there. He got a PhD for it. He's now a professor, tenured professor. So, we have to replace them with more sensible professors. Otherwise, remember, many of our children go to American universities. Many NRI children living in America go to those universities, and all of them get brainwashed with this. You meet NRI children, which I do sometimes when I go there, especially if they've been to elite colleges, they spout extreme leftist India is about upper caste hegemony, Hinduism. No, I'm not denying that there's casteism in India, but to say, it's just like they say all of English literature is white male dominance. And certainly Eliot had certain reactionary tendencies, but he was the greatest English poet of the 20th century. There's no point in running away from that and reading some Nicaraguan, writer and saying that that's where literature begins and ends. So this is a tough one, but we have to do it. And I don't like the self goals of this present government. We can't put some vague fellows who say Rama went in a plane and all. I mean, that doesn't work. That's a self goal. That doesn't work. We have to work hard to find people to get this academic bias fixed.
Well, friends, all interesting things have to end now. See, our time limit is over now. I'll use 2-3 minutes which I've left for myself, and I thought that I would make a sort of admission to Jerry that I'm a confirmed Nehruite. And I think one has to understand Nehru and Nehru's policy in historical sense. And I thought, no, historical sense. Well, all of you abused him enough, so I thought I'd explain why Nehru did what he did. And Nehru did exactly what Friedrich List did in Germany, or Gershon Kron talked about all the latecomers, what was done in Japan, what was done in China. All latecomers used protectionism and heavy industries. And so did Bombay Plan. So he was not doing anything very extraordinarily different. Exactly every other country did. So, and second and more important reason in my view, why public sector or state became entrepreneur, because they felt, rightly or wrongly, you can make a judgment, that there's debate between Vakil and Malnabis, or Vakil and, which was, debate was between textiles versus steel. The argument was, if we had followed textile policy, India would have got integrated with the Western economies, where the objective was to make integration within the country. Because they still got interested to integrate the country, because the whole colonial infrastructure was essentially towards metropolitan areas. So Nehru and et al. Deliberately chose a policy to integrate the economy, but they called it steel. But essentially, it was moving away from international division of labor, which they thought would have trapped India in different kind of exchange, and one can take a different view on this. But it's very ahistorical to denounce Nehru 70 years later. I think you have to understand what is the force of it. Finally, and I think it was great. Let me tell you, had Nehru followed the policy of Vakil, that time the entrepreneurial base in India was so limited that you would have got what happened in Indonesia, where more than 1 million Chinese entrepreneurs were massacred because there are no non-Chinese entrepreneurs. So I think where state has to become entrepreneur, because entrepreneurship was very low. The social base was low because capital markets don't existed. So whenever capital markets don't exist, state has to play a role. And that's what Nehru was doing. There was no, and if you, in fact, many of your passages reminded me of reading the Discovery of India. Almost Nehru's writing. So to say that Nehru was sort of something which is ahistorical, or evil person, I think is very unfair. I think he played a very important role.
He was not evil, he was wrong.
He was not even wrong. He was not even wrong. He played exactly the same role. If you read Bolso's book on Japan, Meiji railway started more different and no different than Nehru. So I think, and finally I'll give the argument is what I think is a Hegelian or Kantian, I don't know. His approach responded, he may correct me if I'm wrong, but real is rational. So if what happened was if the rational thing to happen. So with that I'll defend Nehru, but otherwise I think it's a brilliant book. I will ask each one of you to buy 2 books as was suggested by Suren, one for yourself, one to give to somebody. And once again, I want to thank you all, especially our panelists, for giving a really very thoughtful and exhaustive view on this very, very important book. Thank you very much.
There are a couple of things before we announce the program closed. First of all, I think this is the inherent beauty of a PIC program, that a book called The Conservative Thought the concluding remarks starts with the admission that I am a Nehruite. So, a big round of applause to Pune International Center. I think it's the best university that I could have taken admission into. I mean, each one of the speakers, some of them whom I have heard multiple times, and every time I hear them again, there is something new to learn. So, all of you, sir, once again, thank you so much for this wonderful session. Now, coming to the important announcement, so we have another book as a gift for our panelists. Dr. Kelkar, I would like you to do the honors and provide a copy of that book to all the panelists. This book is all about pole vaulting. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. While I think Jay, you want to talk about that book? You want to say what that book is? Reinventing India. So that's a book by Dr. Mashelkar. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Coming to the next one. So please block 13th of January. It's a Monday evening. That's when we talk about next book that's written by none other than Dr. Vijay Kelkar and Professor Ajay Shah in service of Republic. It's gonna take place in ICC Towers, not this hall, another hall upstairs. Block your time. Be there. Um, Final bit of thing related to book. Again, a reminder: this book is available on sale, so please don't forget to pick your copy. Or, as Mr. Khirwadkar advised, pick 2 copies. Um, so that's about the program. My final order of things is to thank everyone. So panelists, thank you for the wonderful session. Dr. Kelkar, thank you for chairing the session. Jerry, wonderful to see you here and welcome again as a PIC staff as well as a co-alum. Thank you for being wonderful audience, PIC members, students, all the Punekars. And finally, MCCI for the premises and all my team members who put together this event. Thank you so much. With this, the program is announced closed. Thank you.